Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Newman Center. I'm glad so many of you were able to come today. My name is Father John Meehan. I'm a Jesuit, and I'm the interim director of the Newman Center. And it's an honor to be here for this special lecture, the 2019 Claude Lecture on Catholic Social Thought. And I know from when I was studying theology, they used to say Catholic social teaching is one of the best kept secrets in the church. And so I look forward to having the secret unveiled a little more with you today. This is a Catholicism in Public Life lecture series, and I'll be your moderator today. So we will have an introduction to Dr. Taylor, and then following his presentation, we will have a chance to ask questions. And so you can see in the middle of the floor a microphone for people, those of you who would like to ask a question to Dr. Taylor. As you know, the Newman Center is very much in the spirit of Blessed John Henry Newman, a place where faith and culture can enter into dialogue, a place where faith and reason enter into dialogue. And so this is one of our 4 named lecture series where we like to feed not only the soul but also the mind, to bring faith and reason into dialogue with each other. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this evening, the Newman Center itself, and the Newman Institute of Catholic Studies. Without further ado, I now call on Dr. Dan Seary, Associate Professor of Religious Studies, to introduce you to Dr. Taylor. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. McGill's internet bio on Professor Taylor begins by stating that he is one of the most important thinkers Canada has produced. And I think that's a pretty accurate statement over the history of Canadian political theory and philosophy. Charles Taylor, I think, stands as one of our most stellar figures in both in the national and international conversation. His work has been playing a pivotal role in shaping global conversations about modernity, multiculturalism, secularity, religion across an array of academic disciplines. As an engaged public intellectual, his contributions have also shaped debates and developments in political as well as legal spheres. Probably one of the more cited figures in Canadian Supreme Court decisions around religion and secularity. Taylor's work has received both national and international acclaim. He was awarded the first Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Gold Medal in the Order of Canada. He's been the recipient of a series of the most prestigious international awards for scholarship, including the Templeton, the Kyoto Prize, the Berggruen Prize, and the Kluge Prize, to name a few. 2007, he was appointed by the Quebec government as co-chair to the Reasonable Accommodation Commission. In the same year, he published A Secular Age, a seminal study of the changing place of religion in our societies. The New York Times hailed this work as a work of stupendous breadth and erudition. This lecture, to some extent, looks back to an earlier lecture that he gave in 1996, the Marianist Lecture on a Catholic Modernity, ? I remember back in those days, I was happened to be involved with a Concordia event where you delivered an early version of that lecture to a group of people who were involved in campus ministry. That lecture received considerable attention, I think, for the nation of scholars and emerging scholars and students that gravitate around Professor Taylor's work. This engagement with religion, some of us were waiting for. And that was an interesting moment. And it also kind of launched a discussion in Professor Taylor's evolving publications, varieties of religious experience, culminating in A Secular Age. So that text, a few months ago, we asked Professor Taylor if he'd be interested in revisiting that conversation, A Catholic Modernity, and he kindly agreed to. This lecture is sponsored by the Catholicism in Public Life series, and it marks the 2019 Claude Lecture on Catholic Social thought. Mr. Ryan, I know for a fact in my personal conversations with him, had a very profound respect for Charles's contributions, and I think would be delighted to know that he has become a part of this lecture series. Charles, we're honored to have you today here with us, and the opportunity to hear and engage your evolving thoughts on the question of Catholicism and modernity. Welcome.
Thanks, Dan, very much for that very generous introduction. And also, I'm very pleased and proud to be giving a Claude Ryan lecture. I really admired his thinking immensely. I mean, we worked together sometimes on political issues, but also we discussed these issues from time to time. And I think he's really a remarkable person. Somebody very much in the spirit of Newman, I think. So I'm trying to return almost, I think it's about 25 years ago before I kind of thought this out, although it's not quite that long since it was published. Rethink that démarche, that way of approaching, and let me try to describe what it consisted in. The idea was, in thinking out what it is to be a Catholic today, you can start from the traditions come up to us of different ways of operating, different forms of authority, etc., and you can say, well, what do we need to change? Kind of the thing that, in a way, the Nouvelle Théologie had done in leading to Vatican II. But I thought maybe there's another way of doing it. It's the same question, the question of the sign of the times, if you like. And the other way of doing it is kind of a conceit, a kind of imagination. Imagine if you're in a position of Matteo Ricci and his Jesuit colleagues going into a quite different civilization. So imagine, it's kind of hard to do because we're stuck in this civilization for better or for worse. Imagine you're coming in and you're asking yourself, given what it's like, what here is possibly consistent with and nourishing of the gospel, what has to be challenged, and so on and so on. So I did this sort of Matteo Ricci maneuver. And I think that was a good idea because I think other things jump up to you if you take that. So what I'd like to do is do it again now, because I've done some more thinking, obviously, in 25 years. And, I thought through the secular age, and then there was a discussion after the secular age. So I'm going to try quickly redo something of that kind as I would write it today, if I had to write it today. But yeah, so what are the big features here? Well, I'd like to start off with two kinds of changes, each of which has two branches, and then try to sum up what they amount to. The first one is forms of disenchantment. Now, this great word that Weber threw into the pot, is very confusing because it's used in different ways, including by Max Weber himself, who didn't always stick to a very consistent. And instead, there's a terrific book coming out in English by Hans, when they get around, Oxford gets around in their slow process, by Hans Joas, on this whole question of the development of modern disenchantment and how Weber got it wrong. But it's an immensely learned book about all the discussions and backgrounds to this. So keep your eye on that Hans Joas, if you know what I mean, who wrote Glaube, Option, and other works of this kind. And so you start off with, I would say, two kinds of disenchantment. The first is the one that obviously comes to mind from the word itself, particularly in German and Zauberung, all kinds of magic and the supposed existence of spirits and magic forces and so on, has more or less disappeared from not the world as a whole, but from our Western consciousness. And this is not just a matter of consciousness, this is a matter of really lived experience. We don't experience the world this way, most of us, anymore. The sense of vulnerability to malevolence is just not there. Matter of fact, so much is it not there that people today go to movies about, various kinds of horrible things and get a pleasant frisson from these. You see, so you can't get a pleasant frisson from something that really scares you. Yeah. And that's one important kind of disenchantment. And another important kind is, I'm calling it disenchantment, but it's something rather different. The particularly educated people in 5 centuries ago and somewhat less had a view of the cosmos as morally or spiritually ordered. There were higher levels and middle levels and lower levels. And that very often, as it were, infiltrated their political theory, because they had this sense that the order of the political society ought to match the order of different levels of order in the cosmos. The kind of theory behind the French monarchy from the Middle Ages right on until, which Charles X tried to keep going when he had himself crowned in Reims in 1825 with all the paraphernalia, including curing some people of scrofula, and the thing fell flat then. And of course, it would be totally flat now. So now we have a conception of how societies happen, not by reading them back into the order of things, but we have some date at which some people got together and started a revolution, and other people got together and set up a constituent assembly. So these things are human creations. They are really. And along with that, of course, has gone a tremendously increased sense of human capacity to organize our world, fend off dangers, and so on and so on. So those are two kinds of disenchantment. Then much more of this, and this has been a 500-year process in a way, which has been happening over all this period. There are another couple of developments which were much more rapid and started more recently, and I'm trying to find a word for this. I'm calling them unbundlings. This sounds pretty terrible. What does bundling mean? Well, there are two kinds of bundling which I want to describe here. One is, if you again look back in European history to what religious life was like with, first of all, of course, a pan-European church, the Catholic Church, and then various national churches, confessional societies, you get a situation in which the people are belonging to the same church, and the same people are belonging to the political society, and the same people as at the level of the parish who belong to the church belong to other kinds of association, caritative associations, and so on, and so on, so that, if you like, our allegiances, our sense of belonging to important communities are, in that sense, bundled. And the contrast with today is, so I'm a Catholic, but then I go to a meditative group, and then I'm involved in Médecins Sans Frontières. I mean, you just go on with the examples. The different kinds of things I do are, very spread out and involve different people. And as a matter of fact, the really crucial thing, of course, is that at the national level anymore, there are no more really less and less functioning national churches. You have to modify this by the particular, the Germans say Sonderweg, particular way of the United States, where that was true on the level of Protestant churches at the beginning, but the country thought of itself as Protestant Christian, and then gradually it moved out from that to see itself as plural in a much wider way, including Jews, Muslims, non-believers, and so on. With a certain amount of difficulty, it has to be said, that still hangs on to America from that point of view. So, this is, well, really, I put the two forms of unbundling together, but maybe they should be separated out. One is what you belong to, the things you belong to. And if they all come together and it's the same people who are united in their political allegiance and in their church allegiance, for instance. Paradigm case of this would be, Scandinavian countries, the National Lutheran Church, so much so that the National Lutheran churches there have kind of survived as structures which people still belong to, even when a lot of people have more or less stopped believing in the Christian faith. And so that's one kind of thing that's been unbundled. And the other kind of thing, if you like, at the level of the parish, take here in Quebec, all these different activities. There's the liturgy, there is sodality for Mary, you have various caritative movements, you have various special forms of prayer, you have various pilgrimages which are organized. All of this is under the roof or aegis of the parish. And there again, that's the second kind which you find people are spread out or on. Okay, so these are two kinds of unbundlings. These things have become unbundled, disconnected. And the result is that you have, and this is the last very rapid portrait I'm going to give before I try to look at what it means for us. I introduced in the Secularities the concept of the imminent frame. And the point of that was not to, people have misunderstood what I was trying to get at, and I see why now. That's not a theory. That's, I want to argue, a fact of experience. And what experience is involved here? Well, when we operate in the contemporary world, in a country like Canada or elsewhere, we are conscious of what we share with everybody, what's kind of references that everybody will understand and relate to. We're also conscious that we have different attitudes towards these things, right? I mean, example of that kind of thing. We live in Canada and Quebec, and we understand pretty well what the Constitution is like and how things change and how people win elections or lose elections. And we share that, and we know that we share that, and we know that everybody more or less knows that. I mean, apart from weird ideas some people might have, but they share that. But we have very different attitudes. We support different parties. We support different projects and so on, right? So when I say we're imminent frame is part of the common experience, I'm not saying that that's all there is. No, that's all there is one possible attitude, one possible stance. There are other possible stances which are not like that, but we're aware that what we share with everyone else is this starting point, this kind of world that we share. So this is the picture of too rapid picture of the kind of experience that people have of the modern world. And obviously, part of that experience is the experience of tremendous difference, that things that I consider absolutely crucial and essential are totally denied by other people. They can even think I'm crazy. And we live in the same world together. And if you go farther than that, this difference is not just because somebody else out there, within the same family, within the same set of friends, there are these tremendous differences. So it's not a distant experience. Some weird people out there think so-and-so. I mean, which of course is our attitude to certain things, that what we consider far out, but within people that we know well and that we're related to, there are these great differences of stance towards the imminent frame. Now, it seemed to me to be, this is the rapid result of a kind of Ricci type exploration of our world. And it leads to something like a certain notion of the optional, but we have to be clear what this is. And that's what Hans Joas was getting at with faith as an option, Glaube as Option. It's not an option in the sense that it's kind of thing you choose off a menu when you go to McDonald's, if you go to McDonald's. It's because you obviously take one of these stances because you really feel called. You feel that this is, you've got to say yes to this because this is something very important, and this goes just as much for Dawkins as it does for any person of faith. It's not that he just chooses to be angry atheist. He's worked up to do angry atheism. So it's not an option in that sense. But we're all aware that these are options which different people are drawn to, right? And that this is something we have to negotiate, live with, try to understand, right? That other people are drawn in other directions, other people equally intelligent, equally sane in ordinary ways, and so on, are drawn to that. That is part of the common experience. And you can see that if we start from this point of view, it's a little bit different from starting from the standpoint of what things were like and how we want to change them, because you begin to see the possibility of a quite new constellation of things. You see, what we're dealing with the same question. It is the sign of the times, but we're not dealing with it in kind of continuous perspective where we're saying, well, what needs to be altered? No, that's perfectly good perspective. We're dealing with it by trying to see what it calls for today. And so what I would like to argue is that this situation of extreme fragmentation. I mean, another thing to add to this picture is that people are always inventing new or working out new options. They multiply. There are people who have a kind of spiritual life that is some kind of amalgam of some Eastern religion and Christianity, or that some kind of combination of Aboriginal spirituality and Christianity, or Aboriginal spirituality and something else. I mean, I don't need to go into the list. We all know new options that come to our attention because we meet people that we didn't know before. And there's a kind of, I use this expression in the book, kind of supernova effect in the sense of, things are constantly expanding. So how to live this? Well, I think it immediately takes certain things in our tradition, and which were perhaps more marginal, and makes them central. And so I'm trying to look at this for what it asks for, rather than starting off saying what needs to change. And what it asks for, and what it in fact calls up, is a large number of people who are, if you like, seeking. There are a large number of people who, well, maybe have never really had the faith because they didn't were brought up in the family with it, or who did and sort of got very alienated by, well, now I'm speaking very much as a Quebecer, right? So, I was born quite a few years ago, so I remember what people call la grande noirceur, and a little bit of exaggeration there, but extremely authoritarian church. Very often the curé was trying to sort of micromanage people's marriages and so on, kind of a really intolerable situation, along with some very deep spiritual traditions. See, we were created by the French Counter-Reformation, the 17th century, right? That's what, as you know, those who know Canadian history, the English were always rushing off because they couldn't bear living in that island. And the French weren't, so the government in Paris was very worried. What eventually happened, they saw it possibly coming. You had to get people out there and populate this. So the church did, before, that is 1660, the church really did a major part of that. And so we have here, and of course the corollary was no Huguenot need apply and so on, though some sneaked in. And so you have a society which was very much animated by the major spiritualities of the 17th century French Catholic Reformation. Saint François de Sales, and of course Marie de l'Incarnation, who comes out here, certain conceptions of the love of God in both objective and subjective genitive. I mean, the love of God for us and the love of us for God, which I'm old enough to remember. That's why I don't, it's kind of very minority, but very striking forms of spirituality. That's why I can't see it, just as Le Grand Marcheur, or as many of my younger colleagues do. So we have this in which, but this did chase out a lot of people, and perhaps more, chase them out more and more with more anger on all sides, so that that immediate generation that carried out the Quiet Revolution, in spite of the fact that all its inspirers and leaders were members of Catholic Action in one way or another, went rapidly out, and ils sont pas parlables. You can't, for many of them, you can't talk about this. But the situation afterwards is that people start looking. Human beings are always going to start looking for some kind of spiritual direction. And I'm using this, I want to use this word in my own specific meaning. I want to call the spiritual, I want to get a very general concept which applies to almost all these forms of seeking, where you're seeking some change in you, I mean the world, but also involves change in you. And this is not the kind of thing that you can get by increasing your control over something. I mean, I can become maybe not likely a great tennis player if I, go to Wimbledon and so on, if I practice. Yeah, it's kind of greater control. No, you're looking at some more profound change in you, because you're looking at some kind of change in your pattern of basic motivation. You want to be more loving, more open, something of that kind, right? And okay, that's one element of it. In the course of seeking that, you take on certain disciplines, modes of operation. I mean, it can be meditation, it can be going to mass every day, it can be wearing a hijab if you're a Muslim, or and so on and so on. And those both aspirations cum disciplines together form what I want to call a spirituality. So spiritualities, my word can be pluralized. Actually, sometimes people, Anglophones, find this very hard to take, but in French this was normal. I remember reading La spiritualité des pères de l'Église, or La spiritualité jésuite, and so on, that people thought that was normal. And so I want to take this French meaning, and what we have in the world is people looking, searching, right? And that is, some of them get, very understandably, drawn to the Christian faith in some form. And the problem has been a deep rift between them on one hand, and a lot of Christians established in the different churches on the other hand, who find the decline of the earlier bundled situation very hard to I mean, they experience it as a decline, as a terrible decline. I think we have to introduce another term here, the term Christendom. Christendom is the notion of a society which not only contains Christians, but is somehow made over in the image of the faith, its culture, its political structure, its manner of being, its art, and so on, which we lived in Western Europe and its successor societies, which we lived in, and which was, which had its, to quote Pascal, grandeur et misère, really grandeur, Chartres Cathedral, the Divine Comedy, I mean, I could go on and on, but it had its misère, its too tight discipline, its suspicion of the outsider, its sense of hostility to others, and of course within Christendom itself it breaks up, and there's tremendous hostility between the different successor churches. So all that is on the negative side, but there was a positive side. But this is where I think the if you like, the Ricci approach is the right approach. Instead of saying, oh my God, it's terrible what we've lost, Christendom is gone, you have to say, well, what's the appropriate way of being today? Right? And that was in some ways a magnificent way of being from the point of view of the Christian faith, and in other ways not, but in some ways it was back then, but it's just not an option today. I mean, options exist at the level of individuals, but this is not an option at the level of the whole society. So we get this tremendous tension between people who feel that that is an incalculable loss. And generally they have that feeling because they sense that not just is the faith going, but that somehow this was the basis of moral order, moral and political order of all kinds, which is now disappearing. So they also see the changes which are involved in this pluralization of stances, which is expressed, of course, which is powered by what I've tried to describe as the ethic of authenticity. And the ethic of authenticity, of course, is what has made possible all the justification of new ways of living one's life. I mean, including the gay movement, homosexuality, including movement on the part of women to have a totally different role for women. Maybe we should pause there for just a minute and look at that. Why is it that the ethic of authenticity has had this effect? I mean, I would say it has this tremendous facilitating effect, because it's the basic predicate is the Hamann-Herder idea that each human being has their own way of being human, and they have to discover it and work it out as against conforming to some external demand. And the term that's come up, that bubbled up for that, is the term identity. If you used it in a modern way a century ago, people would say, what's that word? I mean, identity, I mean, like one is one. No. Identity is your identification of the really important things for your life. Well, once that became the understanding of what it is to make these choices, the idea that you should be stopped in the name of some external model from living as you live, or very much penalized for living as you feel you want or have to live, as the case of homosexuals and so on, became seen as intolerable discrimination, right? So once it's put in that context of discrimination, then the movement to allow it and to overcome obstacles becomes very, very powerful. The same goes for the various kinds of feminist movements and so on. Which is not to say that every one of these is very positive, but that is a very important fact about our world. So this pluralization is not something that just happens to come. It's something that's built into modern culture. And also the pluralization can take the form of people in all these different movements, being homosexuals, being women who want to live a very different kind of life from the past, being people who want to have acceptance of some of their, what was considered bizarre or strange ways of being. From all these different choices can come people who are moved by the gospel in some way, moved by the figure of Christ, moved by the thought of the kenotic love of God, which is so tremendously powerful. And so you find them approaching, in a certain sense, the church, or perhaps not daring to, but anyway, moving in that direction. And there's a rift in a lot of churches today, because people who are taking the other standpoint feel that in accepting these people, they are continuing the process of decomposition of Christendom. And so it's quite understandable that there is this tremendous conflict. And I would say, we could talk about this later, what this means concretely. We in different churches, now let's talk about our church, Catholic Church, at least we have to find a way of living with each other, not in this kind of semi-civil war and so on. We found a way, a little bit of parishes becoming affinity parishes, right? And that's maybe not a bad thing in the present circumstances. But we have trouble getting together as a church. And I mean, maybe this is going to require more bottom-up government in the church, and that would also help for a lot of other things as well. But let me leave that there. That's one of the very big problems, very big issues that I think comes from this. Another one is that maybe surprisingly, but I think we should try to explain that too, make that clear too, that this development towards what I call seekers, people looking, has gone along with a surprising degree of ecumenicism. And ecumenicism is not only on this side. I mean, the ecumenicism is very often on the side of people who are really, if you like, Christendom mourners, in a sense, So which is perhaps surprising, but you see in the United States, unity between a lot of Catholics and a lot of Protestants behind what is called the conservative movement, in that weird American vocabulary that I never really get my mind around. And also Jews coming in, magazines like First Things put together these kind of reactions. So there's a kind of ecumenicism of that type, but a very strong and interesting ecumenicism of seekers, because it's different from previous kind. The ecumenicism we were fighting for, I mean, this goes so fast. My second or third cousin, Irénée Beaubien, really, was also in the Jesuit movement, started a Catholic, so in Quebec, one of the first Catholic pioneers of this kind of ecumenical movement. And there it was just important to stop cursing each other, stop condemning each other, extending some kind of hand of peace and so on. But then it moves farther. John Paul has people praying together in Assisi. And then it moves even farther among these, what I call seekers, because you really get an ecumenicism of exchange. People are really interested in what the other person, what's moving the other person, what spirituality is moving the other person, for complex reasons. I mean, sometimes you pick up interesting disciplines, Think of John Maine, to whom I owe a great deal because I'm, meditating in that tradition. John Maine, the Benedictine monk, was in Malaya, and then called Malaya, not Malaysia, and he had this friend who was a Hindu guru, and he learned, point meditation from him, and then he rediscovered, looking in the tradition of John Cassian and so on, he rediscovered something similar in the Christian tradition. Here you get one of these borrowings, right? I mean, eventually they got Christian roots, but that encounter was what put him on that path. And I think we see that again and again and again. So part of it is borrowing, but part of it is just understanding. You feel the need to understand what makes these people move, what is deep there, and then from that you get a kind of friendship. You feel you share something with them, right? So you get ecumenicism, a mutual understanding, and then the ecumenicism of friendship, which I think is something. It must have happened in Andalusia back then to some degree, although I think we maybe a little bit sentimentalize that. It must have happened at the court of Akbar in the 17th century, in wherever it was, Delhi, Agra, wherever he was, I guess. As he also held these kind of debates, mutual discussion between, again, the Jesuits were there, needless to say, and Jesuits are everywhere, and mullahs and so on. But it's happened to an extraordinary degree in our period, right? So that we get two great conflicts, great religious conflicts, which are in our world. We get this conflict between people who deeply regret the decline of Christendom on one hand, and the seekers on the other hand, which we have to try to make up within churches. But this has also led to tremendous religious conflict. See, something similar is going on in Islam and here is where politics comes in a very unfortunate way, which is perhaps less so in ex-Christendom, and thank God for that, but in the Islamic world, political mobilization against Western colonial powers, mobilization against neo-colonialism, mobilization in Pakistan against India, mobilization, etc. And now mobilization of Shia against Sunni and Sunni against Shia. In those societies, when the faith becomes a marker of political mobilization, invariably certain things happen. It gets radically simplified. It gets, what it involves gets, if you like, radically simplified, and simplified in the following way. In those great traditions, as in ours, there are both elements of do's and don'ts, behavioral rules, etc., of one kind or another, Sharia in the Muslim case, on one hand, and various spiritualities on the other hand. You got the great, Sufi spiritualities. And when you get these faiths becoming markers of political mobilization, what invariably happens is the first gets accentuated, it gets narrowed down. In order to get narrowed down, it usually refers to, it has a sort of Salafist dimension in the Muslim world. Very often it refers back to the very beginnings when it was quite a pure operation. And what gets marginalized are the spiritualities, so that you get, in certain cases, in Pakistan, to be Sufi today is to be in danger. Certain moments, certain kinds of Sufism they're gunned down by drive-by shooters, and of course in Iran under Ayatollah Khomeini, the same thing happened. So you get this. So in this complex situation that we come to an end here, maybe I'm going on for too long, yes. But in this complex situation, what you get is that, here in the Christian-Muslim relation, of course, the hardliners are also very much against the other. But the people who are resisting that are who? They're the people with deep investment in the spiritual traditions who are trying to resist this one primary mode of opposition. When the Saudis offered a lot of money to Senegal, the population is almost entirely made up of 4 Sufi tariqat, right? There are a few Christians, a few Catholics there, but majority is this kind of Muslim. They said, no, thank you. You're going to set up these madrasas and turn our children against us, and they refused it. And in a certain sense, when I talked about the ecumenicism of friendship, certainly in my experience, with a Senegalese friend in particular I have in mind, I feel tremendous sense of fellow feeling, and the exchange is something very profound and very, very, I think, enriching for both of us, right? So you can see how there's a tendency for there to be a kind of guerre de religion, back to the Crusades, back to the Saladin and Richard I on one level, and on another level, there is this wonderful exchange, and both of these can have political consequences. This kind of exchange that I'm talking about can be, in some way, get us over, make it easier to get over the Crusades and the Jihad, fighting each other. And so that's another major struggle. Putting that all together, I think we need, I'm very theologically challenged, so I can't really work this out, but we need something like an understanding of an itinerary, a way in which people come to the faith. And since they come from very different places, the itinerary is very different. So if you're living in the Western world in the imminent frame, there are certain ways of coming to the faith from the experience of this imminent frame. And we could just try to describe that. I'm trying to work out that in connection with, this may sound wild and weird, in connection with post-romantic poetics, which I see as, figures like Hopkins are very interesting from this point of view, because Hopkins is a post-romantic poet. And his way back to the faith is very, very much that of somebody in this historic situation. And we need the concept of different itineraries and a respect for these itineraries and an understanding of them. And that would be my way of trying to work out what Vatican II called the signs of the times, my direction. So what I'm saying here is I'm defending my sort of Ricci in China move as one that's very rich in potential insights to answer this question. Well, let me start. I think I've gone beyond the contract we made at the beginning. I'll stop here. Please, let's have your reactions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor, for that enlightening reflection. And I suppose I should give, as a Jesuit, I should give a disclaimer. Although you mentioned Matteo Ricci, Irénée Beaubien, and Hopkins, the Jesuits did not sponsor this evening. So it's pure coincidence.
Also, it ended very badly because they were disavowed by Rome.
Yeah, that's true. There was the suppression. So on that note, thank you very much. I wasn't expecting Ricci to come up, and of course he had a lot to write about friendship, including a treatise that was well read among Neo-Confucian scholars, and someone who didn't presume to bring God to the Chinese, but helped the Chinese discover the presence of God in their midst. So we have time for questions, and we have a microphone there, and what we'll do is I will keep an eye on order of questions, so that you have a chance to ask your question. I would ask that you ask a question and refrain from long comments, but to get to the point with your question for Dr. Taylor. And we've got about 20 minutes or so for questions. So concise questions, and hopefully we'll all have a chance to ask the question that we'd like to ask.
Hello, Professor Taylor. My name is Deborah Rankin. I'm here on behalf of the Montreal Times. I just want to ask you a question about your view of religious symbols today in public buildings and public instances. As you know, in the wake of the election of François Legault and Coalition Avenir Québec, the whole issue of reasonable accommodation has come up again. This past week, there was a two-page spread in the Gazette on the role of the crucifix in the legislature, the National Assembly, the City Hall. Should it be kept up or taken down? And there's also been an issue of what some are calling religious profiling. Questionnaires were sent out to the principals of schools, asking them for a head count of people staff who were wearing religious symbols and their status. So what's your opinion on the issue of religious symbols today? Sorry, sorry, it was, someone had to ask the question.
Totally against it, but I could repeat I don't think I necessarily need to repeat the arguments, but the concept of laïcité or secularism that I share with lots of people is one in which the institutions are neutral. That's a matter of how they act. And the people who work in the institutions are individuals with a spiritual life or not, and they have freedom to express this, to work out this spiritual life. So I make a clear distinction between the institutions whose neutrality has to be judged by what they do, and the individuals whose freedom of conscience is entire.
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
Just to clarify, in your view, it's acceptable for people in positions of authority to wear a hijab, a kippah, a cross, for example. But would you take correct? Yes, it's okay for people in positions
Correct,
of
okay,
authority
yes,
to
it's
wear
correct.
a hijab, including a judge,
Yeah,
whatever.
provided whatever they wear isn't functionally a problem. Now, if you have something in a niqab or a burqa, it can be a functional problem.
Right,
in certain
okay.
circumstances.
That's
But
a
if it's
separate
not a
case.
functional problem, it's not a problem.
What about the crucifix? Today I was at I was at La Mairie in Saint Laurent, the borough of Saint Laurent. There was a crucifix. It wasn't prominently displayed, but
Yeah.
I could see it from where it was. Are you
Yeah.
are
Now,
you
I think,
opposed?
you
Do
know,
you
You can
care?
always argue, as they do, that c'est patrimonial, right?
Yes.
Because it's both in Quebec. Let's face it, it's both, right? So I'm not, I think maybe the one right over, put up there by Duplessis, maybe I'm influenced by that, over the speaker's chair, maybe that's not a good idea. But what I really think is intolerable is that they get after this Muslim woman or this Sikh man and kick
Right.
them out, right, on one
Right.
hand. Although for some of them, it's really patrimonial. It's part of their identity. It's very mixed.
Sure.
And they give the crucifix a pass.
Yeah.
If they gave them a pass, I wouldn't mind. If they
Okay,
gave
so
the
you think it's hypocritical? I'm putting a word in your mouth, but
Well, it's not just hypocritical. It's deeply insulting to the people. It's adding insult to injury.
okay, it's insulting. All right, thank you.
Yeah, so that's.
Yes, good afternoon. So I'm not a journalist. I'm Daniel Bélan. I'm the new director of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. And I have a question that's broader than the previous question, but that deals with that political context. But what I'm thinking today with this state-imposed secularism, I see that in France, I see that in Quebec, is that and I'm wondering what you think of this, whether this is not bringing people from different organized religions together. I'm thinking about these Muslim kids in France who go to Catholic school in France because they can wear their hijab there or their religious symbols at school, and they go to a Catholic school, and it seems to be going quite well.
Yeah.
And we see that in Quebec too, many Catholics who oppose, like you, who oppose some of the policies that we are debating today. So is it not part of Catholic modernity also to, in a way, forge coalitions with people of other faiths, other organized religions, in a way to take part in a political debate over secularism? But my second question is, well, that could just increase the gap between people who belong to different organized religions and secularists and people who push for secularism. So how do we actually give peace a chance in terms of this political battle between secularists who want to use the state to kick religion out of the public space altogether, and people from different organized religions who seem to now work together to oppose that?
Well, we have to civilize those people that the principle of laïcité, really, if it's really neutral, it requires them to drop their attempt to impose it on others. See? I mean, the thing is, and as a matter of fact, the trouble they're going to get into is that Canadian jurisprudence is just about entirely against that. I just read Pierre Bossé just sent me his latest paper. It couldn't be clearer on this. It's going to be invalidated by the courts because it involves a discrimination. If I profess a religion or a belief which doesn't require me in my understanding of it, and it's, Canadian jurisprudence, it's your understanding of it that counts, not what some imam or rabbi or priest says. Okay, if I'm lucky enough that I have a religious belief where I doesn't have any requirement that you see what I am, I get a pass. If you have a religious belief which requires that it makes it unavoidable that you can be identified, you don't get a pass. That's clear discrimination on a ground that is not permitted by either the Quebec Charter or the federal charter. They're going to have to invoke the non-obstant, right, the notwithstanding clause, then every 5 years. And I don't know if Quebecers are going to really like that. You invoke non-obstant and you're saying, we are violating one of the rights of the charter. Anybody not notice? We are, And every 5 years you have to say, we're violating another. I don't think that this is, we just have to go on fighting this.
Thank you. Professor Taylor, I'm Deacon Andrew Bennett, and I direct the Cardis Religious Freedom Institute in Ottawa. I wanted to explore a little bit more this idea of these two groups, the seekers and those who mourn the loss of Christendom. And what is the motivation of the seekers? Because I work a lot with young people, especially people who didn't have any particular religious faith and are now coming into a religious faith. And so I'm wondering if what the mourners of Christendom are mourning is an establishment, a certain establishment that is gone. And it's not so much the faith they're mourning, it's this established understanding of the faith and everything that meant in society.
Yeah.
Is what the seekers are seeking, or have the seekers understood that there is something that was always there that maybe got obscured by Christendom. And they desire that because what secular society is telling them, they have sensed is somehow false. And they're seeking something that has always been present, the gospel, the traditions of the church, holy tradition, and they desire it because they are not getting it elsewhere. And so they see something that is true. Whereas the mourners of Christendom maybe have that sense deeply, but they're mourning something else that is not necessarily the gospel, because the gospel continues to remain.
Well, they're mourning a certain expression of the gospel, right? And of course, this comes out in, I think, perfectly acceptable forms. If people say, "I just love the Tridentine Mass in Latin," I'm all for that. I think that should be possible if that means something to them. But along with that goes certain sense of discipline, of condemnation of certain things, right, that are considered that have been ruled by the church out, and so you've got to stick to that. And you see their sense of the faith is very much bound up with that. Now, it's quite almost certain that a great many of these seekers will be seeking. You see, you've got some kind of intuition, there's something there, and you're not quite sure what it is, and you're trying to work it out, and you're looking for people to give you a sense of direction, or certain kinds of religious disciplines that will help you move ahead. They have a different set of associations, and these first ones are just not only not meaningful to them, but are seen to be unnecessary burdens to them, right? So, see, but there is something like the same basic, the base of the gospel, very powerful thing, very powerful thing. If you actually read it, wow, it's very upsetting, and so, it's just not surprising that it goes on being the case. But it's also not surprising in our world that a lot of people have other spiritualities that move them in other directions.
It's a question of those that desire something that is true, and they long for something that is true against maybe a pervasive sort of relativism and a lack of truth that they see in society. Is that at the core of the seeker mentality or the seeker rationale?
I mean, it can be, but if I ask myself what most moves me, it's not that something. I mean, there's some terrible things in this society which move me to take the political positions that I take. But what moves me is not what's going on around. What moves me is, this. It's very hard. I mean, it would take, many, many hours of self, revelation to get clear on this. But I'm very powerfully moved by this possibility of becoming something very different and having an impact on the world that on people around me that I couldn't without reflecting that love to some degree, right? It's,
Thank you for your presentation, Professor Taylor. My question follows very much in the Jesuit tradition and the principles of Matteo Ricci. Presented us actually with a marvelous dialectic which confronts modernity in a very unusual way, whereby the emanator of religion has to, at the very same time, stand firm by his principles and, at the same time, tolerate what he must, by training and by his earliest experiences, acknowledge as immoral. It becomes a challenge for that individual, which in the previous context, in the previous era, was irreconcilable and resulted in fallacy. In our day and age, it becomes a more credible task to seek this type of reconciliation. Not an easy task, but the question is the direction the ultimate resolution of these contradictions? Do they indeed lead to an improvement in society? After all, if one believes in a certain set of principles, one normally espouses those principles because he will seek a greater good, a higher being, and a greater spiritual and epistemological fulfillment. By conceding, does that individual not lend sway to more corruptible influences which might disturb this premise? Or, on the other hand, is each individual constrained in his own, let's say, monological context in which he can pursue his own fulfillment, independent of the others? Can a true harmony be achieved through this type of context? Or is it a question whose deliberation will only lead to more chaos in the future? Thank you.
No, I think you've got to make a distinction. I mean, there are differences I have with people because they're not moved by the same thing I moved. They're moved by something else. Eh? And on one hand, you've got to let the Spirit do its work. You can't force that. Now, there's another set of issues where people do appalling things to each other, right? Like what's now being proposed here, but that's a mild version. You know, you look, listen to the State of the Union the day before yesterday. Pretty horrifying moments in that. Just multiplying the cases of hate crimes which will happen by this kind of rhetoric, right? Sorry, I'm going to fight that till the last breath. And if I were an American, I would be working night and day to get that guy out, or get that kind of thing out. So you see, there are these issues that we don't have to be neutral on. But the big differences between what really profoundly moves you, spirituality moves you, some of the people working alongside me and that kind of thing, alongside us and that kind of thing, are atheists, some of them are Muslims, some of them are Jews, some of them are, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a question of respect for, if you like, the movement of the Spirit in other people, which I think is central to this, respect, and more than that, friendship, interest, and certain issues that we have to deal with in our world that have to be, terrible things that have to be stopped.
Fair enough. You solve the hate issue, but the issue of, how do you say, epistemological completeness still prevails, unfortunately. Would you agree? Or?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, Professor Taylor. I just have a bit of a question. In a Catholic modernity, and then again in a secular age, sacrifice and suffering are kind of brought up as having a reparative potential to addressing issues of violence. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit maybe about what inspired you in your thinking on these topics of sharing suffering with others as a path towards addressing,
I didn't quite get it. You said the suffering of others as a path.
Sharing suffering, sharing in the suffering of
Yeah.
others, and also sort of the reparative or transformative aspect of suffering, of a sacrifice.
It's not so much the suffering, which is the important thing, but if to the extent that you can share, that you can lift the burden on someone else, that is part of the practice that makes you, if you like, more permeable by that love of God for all of us. I mean, that's one of the ways of increasing it in the world and in oneself, and therefore in the world, and so on. Yeah. But it's not suffering itself which is good here. It's the way you stand towards it.
John Zucchi from History and Classical Studies. I have a question. I was really struck by the fact that you don't talk about mourning the decline of Christianity, but of Christendom. Because it seems to me that if one is seeing a decline in Christianity, one has to somehow look at one's experience, whereas if one is mourning the passing of Christendom, one can bypass one's experience. And I'm wondering if this in fact this bypassing experience on the part of those who mourn Christendom is what's contributing a great deal, in fact, to that wall between the seekers and those who mourn the passing of Christendom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is. Putting a tremendous importance on it. I mean, in other words, what I think the seekers have to teach us all is that there are different itineraries and particularly different moments in history whereby people come to the faith. And we can be nourished by all of them, actually. That's what's really, really interesting, that our spiritualities can be nourished by reading of, Gregory of Nyssa or people at a very different time than us, but it's hanging on to a certain set of paths which work for you but don't work for other people, which makes an obstacle.
Well, seeing no further questions, I'd thank you again, and I'm glad Dr. Zucchi asked about experience, because certainly Ricci was trying to find God in people's experiences, especially from a very different culture. And so I like that ending on experience. At this point, I'd like to invite back Dr. Dan Siri to thank Dr. Taylor for his lecture this evening.
Just a quick word of thanks. Professor Taylor has had such a rich intellectual journey. There's such an immense throng of former students, people who've engaged your work, not only within the national context, but within the international context. A few years ago, McGill's Religious Studies unit was involved with a program on religion and globalization. We were collaborating with about 30 universities, each of which was designing their own introductory course on religion and globalization. One of the graduate students that was involved with the coordination of this, we weren't deliberately trying to line the courses up in any particular way or the readings, but noticed that there was one author that occurred across all of the syllabi. And these are universities in China, Mexico, Australia, India, and that was Charles Taylor, appeared in every one of the syllabi. It raises the question, what is so attractive about Charles's intellectual journey? I think we all know the kind of rich, historically sensitive, insightful readings that he offers of modern culture, readings that also unearth, recover aspects of our modern journey that are often obscured or overlooked. There's a certain intellectual generosity that he brings, not judging and rejecting new trajectories that have been emerging, but recognizing them, trying to understand, engage them. And often generosity kind of leads to a certain kind of moral neutrality or relativism, but I think that's the other piece of your work that is so attractive, that it doesn't head in that direction, that it actually opens up a space to speak to and engage some of the deeper ethical and religious and spiritual aspirations that we are living with, and I think that was evident tonight. Thank you, Charles, for your contribution. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you who showed up tonight and came to this lecture. Before you leave, most of you, we have your emails if you registered online. If we don't have your email, and if you'd like to be kept informed of events at the Newman Center, we have a sign-up sheet downstairs on your way out. If we don't have your email, feel free to put it there. For those of you who would like to see this lecture again, to hear it again, or to pass it on to your friends, within the week or so, we should have the video version online. And so, again, we can send that out to you as well, for you or your friends. Upcoming lectures, it's a very, very busy semester at Newman. We've got other lectures coming up. On February 21st is the annual Newman Lecture on Newman's Idea of the University and the Future of Catholic Higher Education. It's given by one John Meehan, who's myself. But I was asked to do this before I became director of the Newman Center, so these things sometimes happen. I'm not self-promoting. March 20th, we have Blair Stonechild, Dr. Blair Stonechild, coming from Regina, Saskatchewan. He's one of the founders of First Nations University of Canada, and he's written a book recently on Indigenous spirituality. So for those of you who are interested in Indigenous spirituality and reconciliation, that's March 20th, Dr. Blair Stonechild here at the Newman Center. And the next night, I know these are kind of close together, but it's because of Dr. Stonechild's travel itinerary. The next night, March 21st, we have Sister Lorraine Caza, who many of you know, who will be giving a lecture on the spiritual foundations of Montreal. So the city we live in, she's an expert on this. Very interesting lecture, March 21st. So again, if you're on our email list, you will get invitations to all of these events. And sorry, I forgot one, Dr. Ken Miller, who will be giving a lecture on science and faith on, I forget the date right now. You will get it if you're on our list. It will be sent out to you. I'd like to thank also all of our helpers, Linda, and our students who live here. We have 8 residents who live in this house, and we had a few graduate students today show up and help us set up these chairs and prepare the reception that you're about to enjoy. So thank you, special thanks to all of those who helped plan this event. And thank you again to Dr. Taylor for a very stimulating and provocative lecture. I think we all come away looking at these questions in a new light, and maybe inspired us to read about Matteo Ricci and to see what his approach was in China. Yeah, he's worth reading. He's worth reading. Anyway, thank you very much, and God bless.